Hi everyone, my name is Palwisha Akhtar and I am pursuing a Master's in Computer Science and Engineering degree at Koç University, Turkey. I am part of the Parallel and Multi-Core Computing Lab headed by Dr. Didem Unat. I welcome you all to my talk in which I will be presenting our tool ComScribe that can be used to identify multi-GPU communication in a single node. As we all know, multi-GPU computing has become a trend due to increasing demand of computation capability in emerging domains such as deep learning, big data, and scientific applications. Today, we devise capabilities like GPU Direct Peer-to-Peer that allow one GPU to directly access peer GPU's memory and NVLink Interconnect that allow direct connections between GPUs. A range of single-node multi-GPU systems are available. Shown here are a variety of such systems by NVIDIA that differ on the number of GPUs as well as peer access capability that affect the topology. For instance, all devices in DGX2 have peer access capability and are directly connected to each other via NV switch, forming an all-to-all topology. Multiple GPUs in a system means that they should be communicating, be it with the host or among each other. And there are several ways to do this. Let's look at those. Here in this table, we have categorized various data transfer options that CUDA API offers to handle the intra-node communication. There are several factors to consider while classifying, such as the availability of peer access or whether the communication is implicit or explicit. Explicit data transfers occur as a result of using CUDA data transfer parameters such as CUDA memcopy, whereas implicit communication happens when the application uses unified memory or zero-copy memory. Multi-GPU applications can be developed using any of these options. Therefore, communication remains a critical programming component and performance contributor. As a result, identifying communication between GPUs can guide the programmer in many aspects. For example, if the programmer is indifferent towards the topology and device capabilities of the system, unwanted implicit data transfers can occur. For example, in case of DGX1, where some GPUs are not directly connected to others, transfers among them may require explicit routing. Secondly, it is possible for there to be communication bugs in an application such that the result is not affected. However, the bug causes an unexpected communication pattern which may be hard to infer from the debugging alone. Lastly, when single GPU applications are naively scaled up to multiple GPUs, they may still follow a master-slave communication pattern, which would mean that they are not effectively using the GPU interconnect. Therefore, a tool that can monitor and identify communication among multiple GPUs can help reason about scalability issues and performance divergence. And it can also guide the programmer to utilize the GPU interconnects for better performance. Although there exist a number of communication identification tools such as EasyTrace for MPI applications and ComDetector for multi-threaded applications, as well as micro benchmarks for multi-GPU systems such as Starter and ComScope. However, they do not focus on identifying and quantifying multi-GPU communication in a node. In order to fill this gap, we present our tool ComScribe that can identify and quantify GPU communications, then represent them as communication matrices for single-node multi-GPU applications. An example of a communication matrix generated by ComScribe is shown on the right. The communication matrices are represented as two-dimensional arrays that show both the amount of data transferred and the number of transfers between every GPU-GPU and CPU-GPU pair in a node. In the matrix, the 0th index represents the host, and the rest of the indices represent the devices in the node. We have also evaluated our tool on several benchmarks, and we discussed the ComScribe generated matrices for two deep learning applications as use cases. ComScribe is built on top of NVIDIA's profiler NVProf, and briefly it works in two steps. First, During application execution, it collects the intra-node data transfer information using NVProf. Then, it processes the collected information to identify and accumulate the communication among GPUs as well as the CPU. Note that ComScribe also identifies different types of communication. It will generate a bar chart for zero-copy memory transfers and communication matrices for unified memory and explicit transfers. The reason behind using NVProf is that it provides detailed information regarding all the activities taking place on a GPU, including data transfers. It has a number of profiling modes from which the GPU trace mode and matrix mode captures the memory transfers for different types of communication. However, NVProf trace alone requires extra effort by the programmer to extract the total amount of data shared between each pair of devices for each type of communication. This is where ComScribe comes in, to extract the required data and represent them as communication matrices. The workflow of ComScribe is as follows. Our tool runs the application code with two of NVProf's profiling modes, data GPU trace and matrix trace modes. After the execution, according to the number of devices in the node, the data structures are initialized. Then, the profiling outputs are passed only for memory copies by our tool for all types of communications, and the respective data structures are updated with the accumulated data transfers extracted by ComScribe. Lastly, it generates communication matrices for unified memory and explicit transfers and a bar chart for zero-copy memory transfers. ComScribe is evaluated on 8 micro and 3 macro benchmarks. We also study the communication matrices for 2 deep neural network models. For evaluation, we used a DGX2 system that has a total of 16 GPUs with an all-to-all topology. ComScribe is implemented using Python and we ran applications with CUDA version 10. Here we present the communication matrices generated by ComScribe for number of bytes transferred for 8 micro benchmarks with known communication patterns from ComScope and MGBench benchmark suites. Figures A and B show communication matrices for explicit peer-to-peer full duplex communication. Benchmark in A belongs to ComScope while the one in B belongs to MGBench. However, as we can see, the pattern in communication matrix in figure A is not as expected and should have been similar to one in B. With the help of ComScribe, we were able to spot this incorrect communication pattern and we identified a communication bug in this ComScope's micro benchmark. Moreover, the effect of enabling or disabling peer access in devices can be seen from communication patterns in figures C and D. We can see in figure D that disabling peer access results in data transfer through host memory. Apart from generating communication matrices for explicit data transfers, here we can see that ComScribe can also generate results for applications that use unified memory and zero-copy memory transfers. ComScribe's bar graph representation for zero-copy memory can be seen from figure E. We also present insightful communication matrices for 3 macro-scale applications. These applications include NVIDIA's multi-GPU Jacobi solver, NVIDIA's Monte Carlo simulation of 2D icing GPU, and MGBench's game of life. In figures A to D, from the non-zero diagonals, we can observe that both Jacobi solver and game of life employ a nearest neighbor communication pattern, where one GPU shares a hello region with its nearest neighbors and it communicates with them in every iteration to exchange and update the hello cells. Moreover, one interesting takeaway from Jacobi solver's communication matrices is that we can see it uses a circular boundary condition where every cell, including the ones at the boundary, has a neighbor in all directions, which is represented as communication between GPU 0 and GPU 15 in the matrices. Lastly, we will discuss the communication matrices generated by ComScribe for two well-known deep learning models based on data parallelism. The two models are E3D LSTM and Transformer. As we know, for data parallelism, the input is split among multiple GPUs, each of which holds a replica of the model. And in case of stochastic gradient descent, where the training is done in mini batches, the weights of the DNN need to be updated, and therefore there are multiple underlying implementations for the gradient exchange. From the communication matrices of these two models, two variations of communication used for implementing data parallelism can be observed. In case of E3D LSTM, the gradients are sent from GPUs to host, they are averaged, then sent from host to GPU 0. After this, GPU 0 scatters the gradients to all the other GPUs. Whereas in Transformer, the gradients are exchanged using the nearest neighbor communication. As a result, the largest amount of communication occurs between neighboring pairs of GPUs. In conclusion, our tool ComScribe can be used to identify, quantify, and generate communication matrices for intra-node communication. Not only can it be used to study the communication patterns of the multi-GPU applications, it can also be used to differentiate communication types and detect communication bugs in these applications. Here is the list of references used in this presentation. I thank you all for listening to my talk. I will be happy to take any questions.